Hey everybody, welcome to a Black Friday edition of Locked On Guardians. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about an interesting trade proposal from The Athletic that would bring a catcher from Cleveland. Some bargain free agents the Cleveland Guardians could be looking at in honor of Black Friday. And in honor of Ohio State and that school up north, we're going to be talking Guardians rivalries all today on Locked On Guardians.
You are Locked On Guardians, your daily podcast on the Cleveland Guardians, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey everybody, welcome to today's episode of Locked On Guardians. I'm Justin Latta, coming to you solo for the first time. Hope you had a good Thanksgiving. I want to let you know today's episode is brought to you by our good friends at Bet Online. Lots of good sports betting going on this weekend. Thanks for making Locked On Guardians your first listen today and every day wherever you get podcasts. Make sure if you're listening on YouTube, you're hitting subscribe. Stick with us there. We're so close to 1,000 followers. That means a lot to Jeff and I. So hope you all had first of all, I should introduce myself since I'm hosting solo for the first time, but you all should know who I am. Justin Latta, current managing editor of GuardiansBaseballInsider.com, freelancer for the News Herald and the Morning Journal, and some other good places in the past. Hope you all had a good Thanksgiving and our stuff from turkey and good stuff for your family and your friends and pumpkin pie, all that stuff. And maybe you're out shopping while you're listening to this or doing something fun. If you're off on Friday, if you're working, that's a tough one. But I'm here to get you through it. Let's start off with the trade from The Athletic. So the Toronto Blue Jays beat writer for The Athletic pitched a couple of trades out there to trade one of their catchers. It has been rumored that the Blue Jays are going to shop some of their catchers, whether that's Alejandro Kirk, Gabriel Moreno, Danny Jansen, any of those guys. They have three catchers. They really only need two. All varying levels of success and what they're going to get for them. Cleveland has had interest in the past in Toronto catchers, specifically Alejandro Kirk and Gabriel Moreno. Now, it sounds like the Guardians will be less interested in Gabriel Moreno this time around. I think they are pretty set with Bo Naylor as the future of the catcher. Those two would probably not work as well together. Alejandro Kirk, however, and Danny Jansen, but Alejandro Kirk, they haven't had interest in. They were scouting him as recently as 2021. That was about the time of the Jose Ramirez trade, when it sounded like there was some interest there among other players. I think at the time they were also interested in Moreno, but that was before Naylor had the breakout season. But they scouted both. So the trade from The Athletic, from the Toronto beat writer, comes for Cleveland, was for Alejandro Kirk, which makes sense. He's got 4 years of club control left. Jeff and I have talked about him a couple times on the show. Hits the ball well, doesn't strike out. Really good pop time. I think framing's kind of an issue for him. Obviously not the athlete you'd want, but defensively, I know a lot of people out there probably think that he is not as good defensively, but the numbers suggest that he was pretty good defensively. Let me pull that up real quick on Savant while we're talking about him. But Alejandro Kirk last season, a 787 OPS, like I said, 98th percentile in strikeout rate, 88th percentile in walk rate, framing 94. Okay, so I had it backwards. Framing 94th percentile, framed very well. Pop time 34th percentile. So pop time's an issue. Sandy Alomar works with catchers very well. A lot of praise for him when he's done defensively for guys in the past. So maybe there's something they could see there that would work for him. Everything else looks really good for him outside of running, but he's a catcher and he's a bad body catcher at that, but he comes with a lot of control. Cleveland likes him, and he's somebody you could catch with Naylor. You could DH him. I don't know whether or not Kirk can really play first base, but you DH him when days are on, when he's not catching, and I think that works. 4 years of control. If you don't want to worry about his defense, then there you go. But anyway, here was the trade from The Athletic. The trade consisted of Cal Quantrill and George Valera going to the Blue Jays for Alejandro Kirk. And the Blue Jays were really looking, obviously, everyone's looking for starting pitching upgrades. And they also looking for a left-handed bat, specifically in the outfield. Valera would fill that and would go a long way. Jim Bowden said that the Guardians and Blue Jays should both consider this trade. Zach Meisel, the Athletic, didn't really give a definitive answer. He, anytime Jim Bowden thinks a trade is good, I have some doubts, and everybody should, for all the reasons we probably mentioned in the past with him. And there's a reason he's not a GM anymore. I think he would like to be, but there's a lot of transgressions there. Anyway, this is a trade. I don't know if I consider it. There's a lot of factors involved here. I mean, for one, Cleveland really needs to upgrade pitching wise. I think if you trade Cal, people think they're going to shop Zach Plesac, and I don't know if they're going to trade both Plesac and Quantrill. I think they'd rather trade Plesac than Quantrill. Dependable number 3, but I think they also want to upgrade there. I think in the situation they were in, where Cal Quantrill had to start 2 games in the ALDS, was obviously not ideal. He's a good pitcher. I don't know if he's somebody you necessarily want. Like, if he's your 4th guy in your rotation in the playoffs, okay, like that could work. I think ideally you'd want an upgrade, though. And I don't know that trading Cal Quantrill to his homeland in Canada makes a ton of sense here for Cleveland. They need to – they probably would be looking to upgrade the rotation externally, at least in the short term. Long term, I think obviously they're going to try to make sure they have some spots open for one of their big 3 – a couple of their big 3 pitching prospects. I mean, you've got Bobby Allen Bobby Espino and Williams. You have Logan Allen. You also have some other guys coming behind that. I just don't know that trading your 3rd most dependable starter when you need to be upgrading your rotation makes the most sense, especially when Savali and Plesac both dealt with injuries last season, even though Plesac's injuries are all self-inflicted for the most part. I don't know that trading Cal Quantrill here makes sense. I think they would probably find another way to get this done. The Valera one, I'm fine with. I mean, it does reduce your depth in the outfield if you do something like that, because now that you've moved on from Nolan Jones, you still really have just Will Brennan and Oscar Gonzalez in right field, and Valera's not going to follow at that point. So, you have a little bit less depth in the outfield. And as we talked about reviewing right field and center field the last couple of days on the podcast, the outfield prospects in the minors are a little barren. Now, they could use other prospects to move. They can move shortstops, they can move pitching, and they can go and find other outfielders. They can make trades for outfield prospects or future guys, but it's kind of barren right now. So I probably would say this trade's not in their best interest right now. It definitely upgrades the lineup. I think it would be a good addition for them. I feel like in the order of catching right now, Kirk sits behind Murphy. And like I said, I don't know if Kirk necessarily has to be your catcher. He'd make a good DH, but they also don't want a full-time DH. And I also, we've seen Terry Francona. If there's one thing I think you can be critical of on game management, and this is maybe an organizational philosophy, but they always needed a safety blanket at catcher, and that's why Bo Naylor was on the postseason roster but didn't play, because he was there as a safety net. Although, if Naylor and Kirk are catching, you're not going to pinch hit for them, so maybe it's not a big deal. But, let's say they made this trade and, Naylor catches and Kirk's DHing. Well, if they're not going, I know Francona is not going to play without a catcher on the bench behind those two, so you would need someone like David Fry or another veteran to be on the roster if you think Kirk can be like your part-time DH, part-time catcher, and you want to rotate DH as well. So they would need someone who can handle being a 3rd catcher on this roster. So I don't know. I'm going to say no to this trade. I don't think it makes sense for Cleveland. They could make this trade and go out and still upgrade their pitching staff. They could still go out and find a trade out there for a pitcher. But remember, pitchers are going to come at a high price. So they're going to be trading one of their pitchers, and they'll be getting somebody who can help their lineup in return. But if they want to go out and upgrade their pitching and try to win in 2023 with the rotation, because odds are you're not going to get all 3 of Espino, Bybee, and Williams up to the majors. But in the same season, you could. I don't think it's out of the question, but the odds are not great, especially considering they're all would be so far ahead of all their 40-man timelines. So if they're going to go out externally, if they're going to make this trade and then go out externally and add pitching to replace Cal Quantrill, you're just, you're hurting yourself at a potential position of need to upgrade somewhere else, and you have to go out and pay the price. It's like, I guess the housing market is probably not as good as it was a year ago, but in terms of, seeing a seller's market. But a year ago, you would have said, well, yeah, if I have to go buy a house, I could sell mine, but you also have to go buy one. You have to pay the price to buy one. So if you need one to live in, so maybe the rental option is a little bit better. Anyway, I would decline that trade. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let get some feedback on Twitter, wherever you're listening to this. Yeah, I would say the odds are pretty low. Cleveland would consider this deal. Speaking of odds, as we hit our first break, BetOnline is your sponsor for today's podcast. As we mentioned, it's our good friends over at BetOnline.net, your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds, trends for every professional sport and amateur league out there. A lot of good stuff going on right now. The World Cup, obviously. There's tons of college football to bet on right now. You've got Ohio State and that school up north on Saturday. You've got the Iron Bowl this weekend. A bunch of other rivalry matchups coming up this weekend. So the odds have not changed a ton on where Aaron Judge is going. But head on over to betonline.net, make some bets for Ohio State and the school up north. I made a bet on that last year, and I'm going to tell you, didn't go well for me. But maybe it'll go better for you personally. But head over to the site today. BetOnline is where the game starts. Whew. Yeah, I will not be betting this year on sports. Did not go well for me. I hope you're better at it than I am. That's why maybe if I would have looked at BetOnline last year, I would have done a little bit better. I wouldn't have been so confident. Okay, while you're out doing your shopping or you're headed out, figured we would talk some free agent bargains, some extra deals that could be out there for Cleveland this offseason. As far as catching options go, this is where I'm kind of at, which we're talking about Alejandro Kirk in the first segment. I think for Cleveland, for me, he falls number 2 behind Sean Murphy in terms of if they decide to trade for a catcher. I would probably bet on Murphy being number 1, Kirk being number 2. At least that would be my personal feelings on that. Number 3, if they decide the price isn't worth it for those two guys, we've talked about when we did the Catching Carousel episode a few podcasts ago, Jeff and I think I gave Cleveland Mike Zunino, and I know people might look at that and say, well, Mike Zunino hits for a terrible average and he strikes out a ton. That's not what this team wants, but they've shown they've been willing to accept a lesser contact rate from positions that give them quality defense. We know they value defense at catcher especially. But the difference between Mike Zunino and Austin Hedges is that Mike Zunino has 4 seasons of 20-plus home runs. He had 33 home runs in 2021. He's been a solid defender everywhere he goes. Obviously, the caveat is that he had thoracic outlet syndrome surgery. That's always a concern. But the crowdsource results at Fangraphs, which they always take audience participation for contract predictions, and they're usually not too far off base. They're giving him 1 year at $7.5 million. I feel like that would be good for Cleveland. So if they decide they want to go with a short-term option, it's about right-handed batter, somebody who can pair with Bo Naylor, and maybe even start the bulk of the games while if Bo Naylor is not ready to catch full time quite yet. Like I said before, I feel like they're going to bring in 2 external options catching wise. I would be surprised if they just go after one. Even if one of them is like a minor league deal or something smaller than this. But I have Mike Zunino 3rd on the list. So Murphy, Kirk, and then Mike Zunino, and he's the first free agent target. There's not a lot of other catching targets out there trade-wise, unless they are looking at Arizona for that fact. I would probably guess plan D is bringing Austin Hedges back after that. I would say that they strike out on Christian Vasquez, you might ask about. The median or the crowdsourcing results on Fangraphs, they've got him getting 2 years and $16 million. I don't know that Cleveland's going to dump $16 million into the catching position over the next 2 years. I just don't see it, especially when I think they need to bring in 2 external options. I have a hard time believing they're going to bring in 2 options from or 1 option from the outside and spend that much. So Mike Zunino seems like a really interesting fit for them and would come at a price that would be good for them. So Hedges behind Zunino, and then I don't know. I know he's been made of glass the last couple of seasons, but I wouldn't be stunned by Roberto Perez on a minor league deal. They need catching at the upper levels, so you never know what can happen. I still believe that if healthy, Roberto Perez is a guy that can be a good backup catcher anyway, and do the thing. We've seen him. I mean, 2019 might have been an outlier. I'm sure it was an outlier. The ball was, the happy fun ball that year, but they've always loved his defense, and he has shown the ability to take a walk in the past as well. So there's no way he's getting a major league deal. So I could see Cleveland, regardless of the situation, doing something to that effect anyway. They need catching depth at the upper levels. So that's kind of where I'm at on terms of what I think the Guardians wish list or order of wish list will be. That's my personal wish list, but I feel like that's probably maybe something realistic they'll consider. Other outside sources, pitching. This team has not had a free agent starting pitcher in a long time. I think if it wasn't Scott Kazmir, it was like 2015, and it was I don't remember who it was. It's been quite a while. So they have not gone outside of the organization quite a while. The only guys I really can think of pitching wise outside the organization that makes sense for them, Corey Kluber's out there. Maybe they consider reunion with him, but the Fangraphs crowdsourcing has him getting 1 year and $11 million. I feel like they're not going to dump that much money into a free agent starting pitcher either. Kyle Gibson's out there, but he's just more of a Cal Quantrill light, so I don't think that makes any sense for them. Ross Stripling's an interesting option. He doesn't walk a lot of batters, but Fangraphs has him getting 2 years and $22 million. I think that's probably above their price range. They're going to want somebody in the one. I think it's really going to be a 1 year range. That's if they even do it. I think the odds are pretty low. That's all I wrote down. But they are going to be looking for probably a right-handed hitting first baseman who can maybe play some of their positions and can be their DH. Jordan Luplow played some first base for Arizona. I wonder if they would consider a minor league deal with him. Yuli Gurriel is 39. I think he's going to be 40 soon. I'm sorry, he's 30. He's 38. He'll be 39 next season. Had a terrible year. Won a batting title 2 years ago, and some of the stuff didn't drop off. He doesn't strike out, but he's a terrible defender, so I don't see it happening. I'm kind of wondering how much interest this team might have in Trey Mancini. Now that I think about it, Fangraphs crowdsourcing has him getting 2 years, $16 million. Mancini had good numbers at first base defensively. He was very slightly below average in the outfield defensively. If you look at the metrics in the outfield this season, -2 outs above average, but in left field, he was 0. In right field, he was -2. That's no worse than Oscar Gonzalez. And he was a +2 at first base. Doesn't strike out a ton. Walks a little bit. I've never been a big fan of Trey. I'm going to be honest with Trey Mancini. Obviously not personally. We've talked about this in the past. Personally, not an issue. But in terms of the bat, I just don't think it's been all that good quality. He doesn't get on base that much either. But I don't know. Last season, Cleveland kind of felt like they were comfortable with guys who just hit their way on base and don't walk a lot. He walks a lot, but his averages have always been really low. He's only had one season where his OBP was over 330, and that was 2019, which was his career year. He hasn't come close to replicating that any season. But the guy crushes lefties. Actually last season he was worse against left-handers. So reverse platoon splits, okay. That's going to make me reconsider things. I don't know how long that's been the case for him, but 898 OPS in 2021 against lefties. But that contract, I don't know. I'm looking at the contract on Fangraphs at 2 years, $16 million. Now I'm thinking maybe that's not so bad, and maybe there'd be a fit there. But I don't know. I've never been a huge fan of the bat myself. I haven't been really a believer, but that's not a bad price considering what else is out there. I will say, as a caveat, Fangraphs crowdsourcing only has Jose Abreu getting 2 years, $32 million. I think I would pay that money for Jose Abreu rather than anybody else. The $16 million a year for 2 years, that's a good risk. I just don't see him getting that little money. I think he's going to get a ton more than that. So that doesn't seem accurate to me. So take some of these crowdsourcing results with a big grain of salt if you have any left in your sodium count from Thanksgiving. As far as pitchers go, Alex Reyes is out there as a free agent, and he was an all-star in 2021, the Cardinals reliever. I think Jeff and I have brought him up before. Somebody I think makes a ton of sense. He's not going to get a giant deal and has a ton of past success, and Cleveland's pitching development could do a lot for him. There are some guys in the Rule 5 draft I might be interested in too for Cleveland. One of them is right-handed pitcher Michael Mercado from the Rays. He is a 23-year-old right-hander who's 6'4". Average, I would say fringe average command, so that's average control. Fringe average command would be a 45 and control would be a 50. Control's always above command. 2, maybe 3+ pitches, lacks changeup. Added a ton of velocity in the last couple of years. He can touch 99, but he's really 93, 96. Doesn't sound a ton different than Ross Carver, to be honest, although he throws a little bit harder. This bat's at Double-A last season. Pitched 100 innings. Tampa Bay left him unprotected. I think that's an interesting option for them. Andres Chaparro from the Yankees. I know there's a lot of Yankees prospect value others who like him. Guy who does not strike out a lot and really a third baseman. I don't think they need a third baseman. He's only been Double-A, so I don't know about that. Another guy I'd be looking at is Malcolm Nunez, a first baseman / third baseman from the Pirates. Got to the Pirates in the Jose Quintana deal from the Cardinals. Another guy who he strikes out a little more than average, around 23% last season, 21%, but also walks, 13% walk rate last year. Hit 22 home runs in Double-A between St. Louis and Pittsburgh. Probably not a great defender, below average defender, probably lower grade defender, but a guy who has played first, who has played third in the past, good DH. Potentially a good hitter, someone you can carry because you're not looking for him to play the field. And he's right-handed, so I would be interested to see if they would look at Malcolm Nunez. Cody Bolton's another pitcher from Pittsburgh who they left unprotected, who's had some injury issues, but also has some traits that Cleveland normally likes. And then another one I'm not so sure of would be Logan Porter, who's the first baseman catcher from the Royals. Guy who does not strike out, or he walks as much as he strikes out, and then keeps the strikeout rate in the low 20%. He's done nothing but hit in the minors. He's 26. The only question is, David Fry is a guy who they already have in the system who could catch and play first and third, who is a right-handed hitter. The only question might be is Clark's catching abilities better than David Fry's, because we know Fry's are a little bit suspect at best. As far as we know, I don't know what Nunez is. I'm sorry, I don't know what Clark's catching abilities are, but they can't be any worse than Fry's, as far as I would guess. I mean, not that Fry's are that bad, but I can't imagine that Logan Porter was catching still at this point for Kansas City in the minors and was just as bad or worse. So, interesting option there. He's all those guys are Rule 5 eligible, and I wouldn't be surprised if Cleveland walks away with the Rule 5 pick this year. They have a spot in the roster, and they're unlikely to add to the roster before the Rule 5 draft, which is December 7th. So those are all some interesting bargain-type deals Cleveland could go after just to kind of fill out the roster, maybe find something. They are good at finding value, other people don't. So could see that there. Let's get into rivalries, since Ohio State and that school up north are playing on Saturday. So let's get into rivalries right after a word from our sponsors. And we're back. Okay, so I asked you on Twitter earlier this evening, before I came on here and recorded this, who do Guardians fans think is their biggest rival? I feel like rivalries in Major League Baseball are so hard to manufacture. I think pro sports in general, they're hard to manufacture. They have to come organically. Ohio State and that school up north have obviously a built-in rivalry. In college, it's just so much easier because there's a lot more tradition. Duke, North Carolina, Alabama, Auburn, which is coming up this weekend as well. All those schools have more traditional rivalries. You have the Red Sox and the Yankees, you have the Giants and the Dodgers. Outside of that in baseball, teams don't have, a lot of tight rivalries for the most part. Even in the NFL, you've got division games. There's not a lot. I feel like there's not a lot of rivalries in the NFL. there is, the Browns and the Steelers, which has, been a rivalry for sure in the past, but hasn't been a big rivalry in terms of who's been winning. In the NFL, I think it's hard to do. And I feel like in the NBA, rivalries aren't, are short-lived too. The Cavs and the Warriors were rivals for a couple of years, but that was because they were playing the playoffs every year. You've had history with like the Pistons and the Knicks, or the Bulls and the Knicks, and the Celtics and the Lakers. Like, those things have all happened, but they've happened organically, and they're not ones that carry over long-term. They're just so much harder to manufacture. So here's what some of you were saying about who the Guardians' rivals have been over the years. Howard Primer, who was one of my editors at the News Herald, says tough in any given year could be the Tigers, Twins, or White Sox. A lot of evenly matched teams. That's true. Obviously, Cleveland's biggest rival in the Central this season was the Twins, although you could say the White Sox, because there was a lot of tripping going on. The Twins did not like the Guardians this year. The White Sox thought they were going to get the Guardians to crumble this year, but like you said, it could change on any given year. So obviously the Tigers haven't really been the Guardians' rival in quite a while, not since that 2014 to 2016 run they had. So those things can change. It depends on who the matchups are with. Obviously, he didn't say the Royals, which is interesting. John Furlong said, Detroit, if they are more competitive. Yeah, that's true. I feel like the only time Cleveland and Detroit were rivals was when Detroit was good and Cleveland was good, and that was, last, like I said, 2014 to like 2016. Ever since the AL Central's come around, hasn't been a ton of rivalry. I guess 2007, you could say there was a rivalry. That was the I'll get to this comment in a little bit, but someone brought up the Fausto Carmona and Gary Sheffield battle. I was at that game. That was interesting. Chris, Cleveland fan, said White Sox proximity to each other and the amount of Cleveland fans living in Chicago makes it special. I feel like over the years, the Guardians and the White Sox have had some interesting battles. Obviously, this year there was a little bit added in, but none of that really happened until the comments from Elvis Andrus. Like, I can't think of the rest of the year. I guess Josh Naylor's antics after the 2 home runs in extra innings, that probably sparked some things a little bit. But, or I guess you can go back to when Tony La Russa tried to fight Roberto Perez after James Karinchak hit Jose Abreu with the game with like the bases loaded or some situation where obviously James Karinchak broke Roberto Perez's fingers because he messed up his signs. I don't think Karinchak was intentionally hitting anybody because he often can't throw strikes and didn't remember his signs. But I remember Tony La Russa trying to fight Roberto Perez over the whole thing. So I guess there was some moments there that create some heat. I'm trying to go back and think of any other moments with the White Sox that were like that. I mean, maybe there was some more heat with the White Sox when they signed Albert Bell back in the 90s, but I feel like that came more from the fans than anything. Growing up, in the 90s, I don't remember there being a lot of heat with the White Sox until maybe later when the White Sox were a little better, but they won that division title in 2000 for the first time, and they have been inconsistent at best. So, let's see, here are some other ones. Matthew Cannell says the Yankees because of the Yankees. I feel like this one has come up quite a bit. I feel like the Yankees are not organic, but they're the ones that they play themselves into being a rival quite a bit because of all the playoff history going back to the 90s. You had the Sandy Alomar game. They played in various Division and ALCS games in the 90s, obviously in 2007, 2017, this past season. And those were heated matchups. I wouldn't say they were like heated in terms of on the field, but they were a lot of closely played series. So you definitely could say that. And I feel like Cleveland fans, especially, obviously don't like the Yankees, but I feel like nobody likes the Yankees unless you're a Yankees fan. I think everybody doesn't like the Yankees unless you're actually a Yankees fan. And then you could argue, too, the fans throwing trash this year at Oscar Mercado and Miles Straw after the walk-off win and them having to go fight in the stands after they booed or cheered for Stephen Kwan getting hurt. That was more of a fans versus the team sort of thing. Not really the teams versus the team, but it does create a sense of rivalry, which is kind of the whole point, even though you don't want to get there from that idea. But the other one comes from Matt Dallas. Said, for me, it'll always be the Tigers, even though they aren't good right now. And as we talked about that stretch from 2011, 2014, and even 2016, because the Tigers were so close in 2016. Excuse me. And then I'm turning into Jeff. Also, watched from the Terrace Club the year that Foster Carmona and Gary Sheffield had a battle on the field. I was also at that game, had no idea what was happening, but it was hilarious to watch Gary Sheffield run from first base to the pitcher's mound and Foster Carmona to put him in a headlock. That was one of the most interesting things I've ever seen that didn't involve actual baseball at a game. I also wonder, too, how things will play out with the new division or the reduction of division play, and you're going to have more everybody playing each other once a year. Like I've always argued for years that the Cleveland and Pittsburgh should play each other every year. I'm not sure why they didn't do that because of proximity. They always played the Reds every year, but I feel like they should always play Pittsburgh every year too. Also, Pittsburgh's just a fantastic ballpark, and getting the opportunity to go see the Guardians play in Pittsburgh would be awesome. I mean, if you haven't been to that ballpark and you have the means to do so, I'd highly recommend it. Great ballpark, great city, I know, as Clevelanders, and there's like some sort of rivalry with the Pittsburgh, but also a very nice area to go to, that stadium. But I always argued those two should be playing each other every year. I don't really think, we joke about the Ohio Cup every year, and I don't feel like anybody ever feels like that's heated or any kind of big rivalry. It's a kind of a joke who wins the Ohio Cup and who wins the MVP for the Ohio Cup every year. I think the comment from Howard makes the most sense to me. Is it changes on any given year. I think it's an organic thing in pro sports. You don't have the built-in legacies like you do in college sports. I mean, like I said, you have the Yankees and the Red Sox, and you have the Dodgers and the Giants. But outside of that, there's just not a lot of it really going on. Like I guess I'm trying to think. The NL East probably has some, like the Braves and the Mets over the years. There's some history there, obviously. Cardinals and Cubs. I should mention Cardinals and Cubs. That's always been a good one too. And I guess you got the White Sox and the Cubs. So there's more than I let on as I'm thinking about it more. But it just seems like I guess there's a bigger pool in college sports too. But a lot of the things like the White Sox and the Cubs don't. Guardians and Reds, the Ohio Cup is not the same as the White Sox and the Cubs, things like that. So I think that it makes the most sense. It just depends on the given year. It depends on the division race and how tight things are. I mean, would there have been a lot of intrigue in the race with the White Sox and the Guardians this year, especially down the stretch, had Elvis Andrews not made those remarks that actually were probably overblown a little bit, but they were fun. And then, had the Guardians and had so many walk-offs against the Twins. And Andre Gimenez doing his little sleepy thing. Would there have been a lot there? I don't know. I think, like I said, I think a lot of it is just very organic, and it happens. It depends on who it is any given year. But I'd love to see. I thought that was the one thing that was good about the extra divisional play. I know everyone got sick of seeing the same team. You're playing 19 times a year against your division rivals, but the more you see teams, the more you dislike each other, or you get sick of things, or things boil over. And not that we're trying to, advocate for starting fights, but definitely want to see these guys have some, passion and create some storylines against each other. And I think the extra divisional play certainly helped that, because teams do get sick of each other. You do see each other a lot, and things do happen. They do boil over. So that was the one good thing. But that will be going away. They won't see each other as much. But I don't know. I'm going to go with the Yankees. I feel like the history of those two teams, just in the playoffs, I think that gives you a little bit there. And it's always like a David Goliath. And some of that stuff's all for fans too. But I feel like in the past too, there's been a lot of back and forth between the teams at times. Just not necessarily like words, but play on the field. And it always creates some very good moments in games for both teams, really. When Cleveland wins, obviously it's satisfying for us. And when the Yankees win, I feel like the Guardians have always played. Cleveland's always played the Yankees tough in the playoffs, no matter when they've played. The battles are usually very, very good. So That's who I'd go with. But I do agree. It probably changes on any given year. If you would like to comment about rivalries and the Guardians, make sure you hit us up in the YouTube comments. Like I said at the top of the show, feel free to make sure you're subscribing. Share with a friend. We would love for you to share with a friend and let them know about the YouTube channel or subscribing, downloading daily. Thanks for listening to today's episode of Locked On Guardians. Jeff and I will be back at it starting on Monday next week to get you ready for the winter meetings. So we just have to get through next week, the week after Thanksgiving. We just have to get through that. And then the week following that is the winter meetings. Now, things don't happen in the winter meetings the way they used to. Teams have technology. A lot of them are in their hotel rooms texting and hanging out and eating food and whatever's going on. I'm sure they're meeting too. But the winter meetings have not carried the same cachet they used to in probably over 20 years, maybe 15 years since the advancement of technology. But there are still some good storylines that happen. There is the Rule 5 draft. Things do the wheel starts to move a little bit in terms of transactions. So we just have to get through one more week before we can get to that, and maybe we'll start to see some headlines. So definitely stay tuned for that. Stick with us on Locked On Guardians and how we end every show. Go, Guardians, go.